So a while ago, a friend gifted me Blaze Blue Cross Tag Battle. I was pretty excited to try it out. I played a bit in story mode, but got pretty bored with it fast. I wanted to play as a character combination I wanted to use, not one the game gave me. So I looked at the main menu, and that's when I noticed something was wrong. There's no arcade mode. A series staple was just suddenly gone. Now, they have a corner where there would be an arcade mode in the central hub, but there's nothing to interact with there. This got me thinking about arcade modes in other recent fighting games, and realized how lackluster they've been lately. Arcade modes have been around since the dawn of fighting games. There are typically 8 fights in a row, with each fight being more difficult than the last. Fight 8 is where you take down the game's big bad boss. Unless you're Mortal Kombat, which has exhibition fights and 3 bosses back to back. These bosses were extremely satisfying to beat just by how hard they were. You can take them down with skill, or by completely cheesing them. After the boss's defeat, you get an ending that either relates to the story, or is just done for fun. But times have changed. Online gaming is more popular than ever, and fighting games are a major esport now. Games are trying to be more serious and more cinematic, and fighting games are no exception. Almost every fighting game now has a story mode, at the cost of a decent arcade mode. Now, there have been games that had arcade modes labeled as story mode, but it's not the same thing as now. We now have full-fledged stories with cinematic cutscenes, but restrictive rosters. You can't just choose who you want to play as and go. You play as whoever the game makes you play as. This limits your practice with a character you actually like, and forces you to play as a character you may be absolute trash with. While fighting games do offer a training mode for this reason, it just isn't the same. Training modes are good for practicing what your character can do, but not that great at offering a fight that tests your abilities. Okay, well, what about online modes? They can be fun, but just aren't the same. It isn't just about fighting a bunch of random opponents, it's the feeling of triumphing over unfair odds. An actual human player can choose to go easy on you. An AI will act based on your chosen difficulty. Now obviously, AI that's too bullshit is no fun. But the cherry on top of an arcade mode are the bosses and endings. Bosses are specifically made to be the hardest opponent in the game, to the point when a boss is a playable character, they can't do half the broken stuff they do in their actual fight. Then, with the character endings, it's just fun to see what your arcade journey was all about. What did your character achieve from beating that boss? With story modes, you'll always get the same ending no matter what. There's really no incentive to play through a story mode more than once. An arcade run lasts about 30 minutes, while a story mode can last multiple hours. Arcade modes have different variables like characters, score, and endings. Story modes will always play out the same. Now, let's look at games that still have an arcade mode, but is significantly worse than its prior titles. Marvel vs. Capcom 3 is one of the greatest fighting games ever made. Only game to rival it is its older brother, Marvel vs. Capcom 2. While MVC2 didn't have an arcade ending, it had a bullshit 3-phase final boss. It's an intense fight that puts your skills to the test. While there's no significant reward, proving you actually beat this thing is reward enough. MVC3 had Galactus as the final boss, with 2 characters you have to fight beforehand, all on the same health bar. Beating Galactus rewards you with a specific character ending, like this one, where X-23 took down Galactus, and Wolverine just acts like a grumpy dad. Now what about the latest in the series, Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite? Well, here you fight 2 bosses, but as 2 separate fights instead of using the same health bar for both, similar to how Mortal Kombat does it. First you take on Ultron Sigma, which offers a pretty good challenge. After that, you take on Ultron Omega, which is pretty boring. You're only allowed to deal a certain amount of damage to him before he walls himself off, preventing any further hits on him. Then, he backs away and calls in Ultron drones. You fight those while Ultron Omega restores a bit of health. You can't attack him during this. After defeating the drones, he comes back, and you can now hit him again. Rinse and repeat the rest of the fight. Okay, so it's a boring fight. What's the reward? Nothing. Sure, you unlock an alternate color for your character, but once you have those unlocked, you really do get absolutely nothing. There are no arcade endings. Why? Because there's a story mode. Now let's look at the Dead or Alive series. DOA 4 had some awesome and some wacky endings. While the game that came after it, Dead or Alive Dimensions, had no arcade endings, it was passable since the game was meant to be a chronicle of every game prior. You get the story of DOA 1 through 4 in one package, so it's understandable why there are no arcade endings. So, what about DOA 5? I beat arcade mode and nothing. You unlock a costume and get your score in time on the leaderboards, but no ending. At least there's a plethora of unlockable costumes and a scoring system, but it still sucks. Wanna know why there are no arcade endings? Because there's now a story mode, that's why. Arcade mode doesn't even have the decency to let you fight a final boss. It's just a random playable character. Where's the overpowered boss to kick my ass? Only in story mode. And this brings us to DOA 6. This game's arcade mode is just like DOA 5's, except instead of costumes, you unlock costume parts that can only be used to unlock a specific costume, and which parts you get are completely random. So unlike DOA 5, you don't even get to unlock a cool costume for your character. You earn the chance to build up a collection of parts to earn the privilege to unlock a random costume for a character you may not even play as, or, if you're playing the free-to-play version, a character you may not even own. Also, just like DOA 5, there's a story mode, and it's even worse than DOA 5's story. Team Ninja, just stop. How do you go from this to this? As bad as NetherRealm's recent fighting games are, at least they keep the arcade tradition. Now, it may not be called arcade mode, but it follows the exact same structure and carries the same spirit. A bunch of random opponents that gradually get tougher, an annoying final boss at the end, and a character-specific ending. They have all of this alongside a story mode. It's just sad to see arcade modes slowly die. One of the best aspects of a fighting game is now just a last-minute addition in favor of a story mode. I'm sure in a few years, NetherRealm will probably abandon the arcade formula just like everyone else. I just hope developers don't follow Cross Tag Battle's example and omit the mode entirely.